Cumberland traffic, Coastline 4041 uniform, departing 11, right on
I was low and it was super turbulent, and all of a sudden I was engulfed by flocks of birds. It was the most amazing thing. There were eagles, there were seagulls, there were crows, and they're all basically flying around on this thing, and I could tell they were fighting for control just like I was.
This is Soaring the Sky, a glider pilot's podcast, coming to you from the Mid-Atlantic region here in the United States and bringing you great soaring content from glider pilots all over the globe. We now join Chuck and our guest pilot.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you for joining us today. Welcome back to the podcast. The intro tease you just heard, now that's just a small sample of the experiences and stories our guest pilot Tom is going to share with us on this episode. Tom's journey does include some powered aircraft as well as gliders. I personally enjoyed his entire story, and I don't think you're going to want to miss any of this. But for those of you that are hardcore glider pilots and enthusiasts out there, and you just can't wait and you want to jump ahead to his soaring part of the journey, you can do that, and the timestamp there is going to be in the show notes. Wings and Wheels has been serving the soaring and sport aviation community for over 30 years. They hands down have the largest and most comprehensive inventory of sailplane and soaring supplies in North America, and they ship globally. Nearly everything you'll find on their site is in stock and ready for same-day shipping. Wings and Wheels is the exclusive American representative for HPH sailplanes. Be sure to check out the Twin Shark, their latest launch. The team has thousands of hours of flying experience in gliders and airplanes, staffed by Adam, Kelly, Julie, and Sean. A friendly voice will answer when you call or email them. Check them out at wingsandwheels.com. Tom Coussens, welcome to Soaring the Sky. So glad to have you on the podcast today. How are you?
Oh, thank you very much. I'm really glad to be here. I've been looking forward to it since I talked to Mitch earlier, and just happy to talk soaring and flying in general.
Yeah, Mitch has been telling me a little bit about your story, but I am excited to hear it. And actually, before we get into the meat of the interview, that's exactly what I want you to share with us. Give our listeners kind of your aviation journey from the beginning until now. Now, I know there's probably a lot there, but take us through some of the highlights with all the different aircraft, the airports, and the people.
Well, sure thing. Well, the main thing is it actually started with my father, who saw a P-51 Mustang on a ramp at an airport someplace in the mid-50s and said, I'm going to learn to fly so I can buy one of those. He wound up buying an F-8F Bearcat, and I also bought I was in a club with a Mustang and a T6 later. But I still remember my first memory of airplanes was actually at Fox Field in Lancaster, California, as a 5-year-old, watching my father fly patterns in the Bearcat. And back then, of course, little kids could wander around. There was no big deal. And I just sat on the grass and watched him fly. So that kind of piqued my interest. And I actually initially took a couple of soaring lessons at El Mirage Field back when it was operational there at El Mirage Dry Lake. And it was too hard to get out there. I didn't have a driver's license or anything because I was 14. And so that kind of dropped away. But then I actually did solo as a Tabria at Fox Field in Lancaster. I chose that over a group of really shiny Cessna 150s because I wanted to learn a tail dragger. I figured if I could fly a tail dragger from the get-go, I could pretty much fly anything.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that was kind of it. And I actually took my private pilot check ride on graduation day from high school, and so the ink was barely dry on the license. And I grabbed my buddy out of high school and my 2 brothers, and we went and flew a 172 around the Antelope Valley, and then came down, took showers, and went to commencement. So that was quite a day.
Yeah, what a day! Wow.
I actually intended to be an airline pilot, but I just didn't have really didn't have the life plan engaged to do so. And so I went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and got an aeronautical engineering degree and went into engineering. And still was thinking I wanted to fly for a living. And so on my own nickel, I got my instrument rating and then commercial single and multi-engine rating. That particular day, I actually flew a single engine aircraft. I flew a Cessna 152 and a Bonanza, a twin Bonanza, all on the same day. I took the single engine and multi-engine check rides all in the same afternoon. That was a very, very long afternoon.
Oh my goodness.
And so, but then that was it. I basically, I wound up getting married and realized that an aviation dream really was kind of out of the question as far as a career was concerned, and began a career as an aerospace engineer, which I did for 35 years. In the mid 80s, actually 86, I decided I was going to get my glider license. I always wanted one. I always wanted to fly sailplanes. And so I went to an outfit called Aerospace Air Service in Rosamond, which is also in the Antelope Valley in Southern California. And I showed up. My mom lived in Lancaster. And so I went there with a change of clothes. I was going to solo in a weekend, just show up on Saturday, and I was going to fly all day Saturday and Sunday and make sure I soloed that one weekend. So I arrived at 10:30 in the morning on Saturday at Aaronson's, and by 12:30 and 4 flights later, I was soloing at 2:33. So,
oh man,
yeah, that was you can't really do that these days, I don't think. But I was actually looking.
Right.
I was looking at my logbook, because I was already a power pilot at that time. There were just not that many requirements for a transition, and so I think I had 4 hours total glider time when I took my check ride for my private license.
Wow.
And there's where things got kind of interesting, and not at the same time. I was flying gliders for a little bit, and then life kind of took over, and I wasn't able to really afford too much to fly. Until very kind of happy circumstance, we had my brothers and I all got some inheritances, and so my younger brother and I decided to go in halves on a Globe Swift. It's a Temco Swift, actually. It's a two-place aircraft that was built in 1948. It was Globe was one of the aircraft manufacturers that figured, hey, we got all these thousands of pilots coming back from the war. They're going to want to buy airplanes. Well, as it turned out, they just wanted to make babies and stay away from the air. So Temco didn't last very long, but the airplane that they produced was just amazing. It was a 125 horsepower, retractable landing gear, all metal. It looked like a P-40, and it sounded like one on the ground with a 6-cylinder engine and one stack for each cylinder. But the bottom line is it taught my brother and I precision flying. If you messed up, it was in the weeds. And many, many pilots piled them up just on takeoff alone because they were not flying them properly. So, a good day for us was to go out in the early morning when it wasn't turbulent and get quite a few landings in before we started attempting to fly to land at 3-point. Because if you didn't do it right, you felt like the landing gear was poking up to the top of the wings. It demanded precision at all times. You could not relax with that airplane for 1 second. And so it was a glorious airplane to fly. And basically, we sold it when he moved out of the area. And once again, it was the same sort of thing. It was like, well, there's other things I got to do, like buy a house. And I was raising 2 kids and things like that. And so flying basically kind of went away for me until a fateful day when I was flying a model airplane in the middle of a field, and a guy came over to see what I was doing and mentioned this place called Cray Field and a guy named John Cray, and he said he was looking for a backup tow pilot. Well, at this point, I hadn't flown an aircraft in 3 years, hadn't flown a tail dragger since the Swift, probably in about 10 years. I just showed up, and John said, "Yeah, check it out, see what you think," kind of thing, So I went and got my biennial flight review in a Citabria at Santa Paula and showed up and jumped in this single seat Pawnee and proceeded to, basically do a single seat test flight.
Wow.
There's no dual in a Pawnee.
Yeah.
Basically just get in and fly it. And it didn't take long to master it, or not. I can't say I've ever even mastered the Pawnee, but get good enough to where I felt comfortable to tow. And thus began just a whole change in life for me when just that one day at John's at Cray and that first tow and just the feeling of it, just this wild and woolly feeling of being yanked. And in an aircraft, you don't necessarily feel like accelerations and decelerations, but in turbulence towing a glider,
Yeah.
you're slammed against the straps, slammed against the seat, back and forth, and trying to keep airspeed and all the things that go on with it. And it's, I love it. I love flying at the front end of the tow rope. And so anyway, that's kind of where it is. And there's also glider, a lot of glider experience as well. So, but that's the start.
Well, reaching back for a moment, of all the powered planes you've flown over the years, and I know you talked about the one you had bought, but what are some of your favorites and what are the most difficult or maybe tricky ones to fly?
Well, as I say, the Swift was probably it. Just to do it right, to fly well. I mean, I think my brother and I probably were among the very few that owned one and didn't land a gear up or roll it up in a ball.
Wow.
So the Swift was really good that way. My brother's Travel that he built from basically scratch, a 1929 Travel 4000 biplane, very unusual airplane in that there's something called aileron snatching, which happened in old airplanes where at stall, because of the way that the ailerons were designed, it was the strangest thing. You'd get a little gust, and the stick would come out of your hand and almost come out of your hand in the direction of the gust, which was really weird. Well, with the Traveler, it happened all the time. So you'd be flying in turbulence, and the wing the airplane would be rocked to the right by turbulence, and the stick would go even harder right. And so you're constantly fighting it, that was really wild. And so to fly that well was another interesting experience. And my brother actually got a T6 Texan, and that's the
Nice.
AT6, the World War II trainer.
Right.
Flying that thing was, it's a 4,000-pound airplane, so the momentum of the thing is just mind-boggling. When you're flying along, you pull back the stick, and the thing goes whooshing up and just, zoom climbs or zoom descends. The other thing that isn't that people don't talk about very much, but me as a light plane pilot noticed immediately, was the torque of the engine. Actually, it's much harder to turn to bank the airplane one direction than the other because of the torque from the engine.
Wow.
And so I think it was basically the prop is spinning to the right and the torque is to the left, and so turning the airplane to the right, banking to the right, was much more difficult than banking to the left. And so there's the whole thing of learning how to do that. I have nothing but admiration for my brother, just having done what he did and flying that around like no big deal. But my dad also had a lot of different airplanes. He had a Piper Aerostar, and if you ever want to see a picture of an airplane that looks like it's doing 200 knots standing still, look at the Piper Aerostar. It's a twin engine. The thing did 300 miles an hour. It was a magic carpet. We could fly anywhere across country in the thing in just a few hours. So that was really, really, an amazing thing. Definitely at the top end of what you'd call general aviation, because there's not much piston airplanes that are much higher performance than that. So
yeah, that's moving.
And there was the Piper Cub. So
yeah,
the Cub's fun flying from the back seat and with the doors open. You hang your right leg out the door if you want. Things like that. So it's just fun to be able to look back on all those things and to know that you can fly. And it's really a marvelous thing.
It is, absolutely. So just a quick diversion before we jump into the soaring stuff. We noticed from your bio notes that you're an aerospace engineer, and I know there are sensitivities around certain companies or projects for some of you guys, but can you give us some flavor of what kind of stuff you've done in that space, or what was some of the coolest stuff you've ever been a part of?
I was an aerospace engineer from the get-go. I graduated from college, and literally the next week I started work at Lockheed California Company and did that for about 4 years. This is in the late 70s when CAD/CAM was just coming in. And so I was one of the very first to not have a drafting board. I wasn't really all that enamored with working at that particular company. And my buddy who had come to Lockheed, basically was looking around, and he wound up going to Hughes Space and Communications. And so I basically followed him there and was involved in non-recurring design of satellites. And that was where I spent the rest of my career, was in spacecraft design, manufacturing, and launch. And so the arc of my career it started with non-recurring design, where our thoughts became the spacecraft, to being the launch IPT lead, integrated product team lead, in which I was responsible for taking the finished product from the factory and launching it. And so that meant we actually rented C-17s from the Air Force to fly them. I was either going to Florida, to the Cape, or to Vandenberg. And I was the launch campaign manager on 6 different missions. There were a couple of GOES weather satellites. There was a TDRS satellite, and then there were some classified satellites that we were launching out of Vandenberg. And so that was by far the pinnacle of my career in aerospace, was to see these satellites. And the thing about it is, when they're being built, they're covered in all kinds of protective covers from dust and light and everything else. And the most amazing thing every time was to be there when the satellite was on the payload adapter fitting, basically, which would eventually be mounted to the top of the rocket just before it was encapsulated by the nose cones. And to see this work of art, it was almost like Venus on a pedestal, to see the immense amount of detail that went into each of these spacecraft, and it took your breath away. And so, for me, I just, like I said, I had the best possible career a guy could want as far as engineering was concerned, because I was able to, I took the vehicles out there, my teams, various parts or various crews that I would bring in would do different functions to the vehicle, integrating it, fueling it, doing all the system tests. Then actually I was on the gantry at the launch pad, overseeing the mating of the encapsulated assembly onto the rocket. And finally, the best part of all, of course, was to be on console like Gene Kranz, failure is not an option kind of deal, and having my own call sign and watching the launch from the control room was just,
that's cool.
yeah, I couldn't ask for better. And so I retired out of that. I'm actually working full time now for a consulting company. I never thought that would happen again. That's one of the things that I failed miserably at, was actually staying retired. So I'm still actually working in aerospace. And I'm now on the rocket side, which is kind of fun. So I can tell the rocket guys, well, here's what the spacecraft guys are thinking. And so that's kind of an interesting living as well. And I'm really enjoying it.
Oh, yeah. And there's a lot going on with that right now.
There sure is. And I'm actually working with SpaceX launches. And so it is a kick. Those guys are.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, you can tell a SpaceX guy, they're all skinny and wear T-shirts and look like they haven't slept in a month. That's basically what. And that's basically it. They're enthusiastic, incredibly bright, and extremely motivated, and they do a fantastic job. And it's been a real privilege to be able to work with those guys launching payloads on. And right now, we're actually launching GPS satellites on SpaceX rockets, and it's marvelous.
Wow, to be a part of that, that's got to be awesome.
It is. It's wonderful to be 65 years old and to have your thoughts still being worth something, your thoughts and experiences. I couldn't ask for better.
Oh, that's very, very cool. All right, so let's jump into the gliders and tow planes. On my notes here, it says that you made the big plunge in 1986 when John Cray was looking for a tow driver. Now, you mentioned him. Now, that almost any time a pilot is towing gliders, they end up flying them too, of course, right? And speaking of John, can you tell us a little bit about him and the glider op back in those days? Mitch also noticed that there's an airstrip in the desert there called Cray Field, and he was wondering if that had any connection there.
Yeah, it actually does. Just one quick correction. I started flying gliders in 86, but I met John in 2001. Yes, John was actually a former quality engineer at Lockheed. He made quite a name for himself. I heard about John in totally different circles about what he was, an epic quality guy. He came up with failure modes for things that were crashing just intuitively. And so, but he always loved to fly gliders, and his dream was to own his own airfield. And so in the mid to late 80s, he retired early from Lockheed and bought this patch of land. And yes, Mitch, in fact, that is the field. It's Cray Field. It's out in the middle of absolute boondock nowhere. He didn't even have power going to it. If he needed electrical power, he started a generator.
Oh, wow.
He'd pump his own water out of the ground. To drive there was, it was like, a time warp to the 50s when you drive up to this place, and everything was kind of, I don't know, maybe a little run down, if you will. But I mean, he had a couple of 233s and some 126s, and he bought that place specifically to take advantage of the shear line that used to run out of Cajon Pass northbound and would intercept the onshore flow coming in from the Palmdale area. And you have these gigantic teardrop-shaped lines of clouds that would extend miles into the desert. So you could get towed up into the shear line and basically just fly with never turning, never circling, never thermaling, just hopping from thermal to thermal along this whole thing underneath the cumulus clouds. And that was his thing. And his company was actually called Shearline Aero. He catered strictly to private clubs out there and did not actually do any instruction there himself. It was all basically just clubs. It was a club airfield.
Oh, okay.
So when I showed up, John was getting up there in age. He was in his late 70s, and things were kind of slowing down a little bit there, but he still had a couple of Pawnees, and that's where I cut my teeth. And he was just an amazingly resourceful guy. He could pick up two pieces of junk and make something out of them and make them fly, kind of thing. He
Wow.
was just a true Renaissance man. There were so many people who were influenced by him in such a good way, just in terms of getting their starts. In my particular case, my life completely changed when I met him and was given the opportunity to fly his aircraft and tow gliders.
Very cool. Our longtime sponsor of the show, the Soaring Academy, is engaged in nonprofit outreach work with local area veterans and also with young people for the STEM programs at their top-notch gliderport facility just outside of Los Angeles, nestled near the north side of the San Gabriel Mountains. They also have a fantastic flight school and are continuing to turn out great glider pilots every month. If you like to donate to their nonprofit initiatives or learn more about their flight school, go to soaringacademy.org or check them out on Instagram at Soaring Academy. Fast forwarding a little bit to 2009 when you got your first glider, how about tell the listeners a little bit about your first ship, what kind of flying you did, and where were you doing most of your soaring at that time?
Well, after a few years at Cray, I realized that my next aircraft was going to be a sailplane. There was one particular guy Yeah. There was one guy who let me fly his Labella briefly. I had one flight in it, and I think he was trying to get me the kind of like he said. I think that the first flight's free.
Yeah.
The idea was to get me hooked
that's right.
on soaring.
It's all it takes.
And a few years later, yeah, exactly. Well, a few years later, I realized, I think I really want to do this, and I'd at least come to the realization that I didn't want to get an entry-level glider as my first. I wanted to have something I could grow into that would be interesting to fly and that I'd want to keep for a while. And so I was looking around for a 15-meter ship. Now, 15-meter gliders, they have flaps, which, it opens up a whole new sort of window in terms of performance and the way that you fly. And so I decided I wanted to get a 15-meter glider. ASW 20s, which were made in the mid 70s, were a little out of my range, but there were these PIC 20s. They were made in Finland in the mid to late 70s. 15-meter ships. They were the first to have a complete flapper-on sort of system, basically from at least my model, the D model, had from the wing root all the way to the tip was a gigantic aileron and flapper-on, and it was all reflex. The entire thing would reflex, and so the thing that was kind of cool about it was when you tow it up, you basically stabilize at your best glide with the flaps and trail, and you'd adjust the trim so the glider would fly hands off of the flaps and trail. And from then on, you adjusted your speed by just playing with just the flap settings.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And so I've actually that's my first and only glider. I basically, I don't fly enough to really warrant buying something, the object of my lust is an ASW 27 or a 29. But I just don't fly enough to really warrant owning something like that. So the PIC is marvelous. It's a really honest glider. It thermals really, really well. And it doesn't do bad in terms of a straight line. It really doesn't have any bad habits per se. I just enjoy flying it. So I've done a lot to it. I put in all the modern avionics and whatnot into it, including a moving map, which basically made it possible for me to begin to do cross-country soaring because I could fly confidently enough knowing what the glider was going to be doing simply because of what the moving map was offering in terms of display and what the capability of the glider was too. So that's basically it. It's been the PIC all the way, and I fly it at Mountain Valley right now. I tow at Crystal, but I like leaving the glider at Mountain Valley because I like the opportunities for flying where you can go from there better than I do at Crystal. That's being just honest.
Yeah. So. Well, it looks like your next gliding milestone happened in 2014 after you'd had a few years practicing in the mountains and stretching your wings on some cross-country flights. And that was Dust Devil Dash. That's an event founded by your friend Rob Morgan and flying out of Tehachapi, a small airport there near the Mojave in the high desert outside LA. But how about tell us all about that? It sounds like quite a pretty cool local event. It's been a lot of fun for a lot of pilots for a lot of years. And Mitch said you had a good low save story here that you maybe could tell us about a few weeks back there out of Crystal.
Yeah, the Dust Devil Dash really was my first event in terms of actually going someplace and not having to worry about coming back. That's the one thing about it I think that is that makes it a bit unique, because with sailplane competitions, you're usually flying out in returns or flying some sort of turn area tasks and things like that. Well, with the Dash, it's basically everybody, you show up, it's always the weekend after Labor Day. And the reason why it's there is because the conditions aren't that great. And so it really takes some work to get some places. And your chaser guy doesn't have to go as far.
Yeah.
But we basically, the flights start in the morning of a Saturday after Labor Day. It's a one-day event. And you basically, you take off. You have a set tow altitude of 7,500 MSL, which is about 3,500 feet above the field elevation there in that mountain valley. And that's it. Off you go. And so you basically go as far as you can in a straight line distance. That's how it's scored, basically. Straight line distance as far as you can until sunset. There have been some stunning flights. In 2014, actually, was amazing. The winner actually flew to Burley, Idaho from Southern California to Tehachapi.
Wow.
Yeah, that was some flight. He landed just before sunset too. So that's where, yeah, as you say, I did have a little bit of experience as far as mountain flying was concerned, and that really came to play as far as flying the Dash is concerned. It attracts all kinds of different flyers. This particular year was a very good year. The conditions were such that everybody was able to make it out of the Mountain Valley area, Tehachapi Valley area, and get out into the desert. The previous year, half the field made it to California City, which is only 15 miles gliding distance. So the conditions were so bad. But this year was good enough that we had several people landing in north central Nevada. The winner actually made it to Elko, Nevada, which isn't too far from the Idaho and Utah borders. And so in my particular case, yes, my Dash was very interesting. I basically made a very low save. We all were able to take off. There were cumulus clouds just south of the field. Everybody got up to about 11.5 and then started northbound because we felt that was the best way to go. Sometimes we've actually gone eastbound toward Arizona, but definitely north was where it was happening. And most people got away very quickly. And I made the mistake of veering off to a particular formation called the Rock Pile near Kelso Valley, which is not that far north of Mountain Valley. And I got very, very low. And I'm looking at guys thermaling above me at 12,000 feet. And I'm down here at about 4,700 and, trying to circle over this little lump and realizing I am in big trouble. And so I really thought I was going to land in the desert. And it's funny, my chase guy, Cam Martin, says, yeah, the concern I had was whether you'd bleed out before I got to you. He was listening to the radio and what I was talking about. And so, but in fact, what happened was I saw in the distance the Honda racetrack out on the desert floor. And I kind of eyeballed the angle and thought, I can probably make that. And so I basically just flew. It was a 10-mile stretch and I was below 500 feet the entire time at 10 miles, basically following the sloping alluvial flow from the mountains. And it dropped away enough that I had about 800 feet clearance to the ground, and I was all set to land on this access road to the Honda test track there. And I found a little lump, a little thermal, just a little bump. And I kept on working it. And it took me away up to 9,000 and I was on my way again. But I thought my day was done in the first half hour.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
That was... And so then I had another kind of low save not far away from there and was able to get away from there as well, actually, at a place called Coso Junction. I nearly was on the ground there as well. I was talking to Cam and I said, what's the wind like? And he says, well, it just picked up from the south about 5 knots. And that turned out to be the infill for the thermal that I picked up. And that one took me up and away. And I was able to then make it to the Inyo Mountains, which are just to the east of the Sierras. And that's where we call it rock polishing, basically where you're so close in that the tips are polishing the rocks. And that's where that portion of of my abilities kind of came in, and just being able to work lift that is pretty much like ridge lift, but also thermals in the middle of it all, and to look at the winds and where the directions of the slopes of the bowls and the hills were, and said, well, that looks like that may be a decent spot to try and see if I can get anything, and working your way up into the hills and on your way. And that's pretty much what I did. It was a lot of very low altitude, but I had Lone Pine Airport made the entire time. So if I really got stuck, I had a place to land, which was really nice.
Wow. I know our producer, Mitch, you met him out at a Soaring Academy back almost a couple years ago now, I think he said. But when he was trying to get his, he was working on his pilot rating there for gliders. It sounds like you still tow there and help the owners with the odds and ends there around the glider port. Could you maybe share with listeners a little bit about your time and memories at the Soaring Academy, and what are some of the things you appreciate about what they are doing there? And Mitch can never say enough about, the great people, Chris and Julie out there, as well as the countless volunteers that show up for their various outreach events.
Yeah, Chris and Julie are amazing. They have a vision for this place. The Southern California Soaring Academy is actually a 501c3. They do teach people to fly, and Mitch, of course, is a great benefactor of that. But they also do a lot of pro bono flying. They have the wounded warriors that come out once a month, and they fly right for them. They also do a lot for some particular magnet schools called SCVI, or there's Southern California. I think it's called Southern California something or other. But, sorry about that. But bottom line is they for the kids that are involved in STEM in those classes, they will bring them out and actually give them a free flight in a glider. They'll also take gliders. They'll box them up in the trailers and take them to the schools and assemble them in the parking lots and allow the students to take a look at them. And they actually give them little tests and quizzes so they can, kind of get the feel for what's going on. So that's what's really marvelous about it. And they have quite a few guys, former fighter pilots and all kinds of people with all kinds of different experiences that are out there teaching people to fly gliders. So Chris and Julie basically eat, sleep, and breathe it. In my case, I started there in about 2014 when John had actually passed away in the spring of 2014. And as soon as he did, the operations at Crayfield ceased. Chris heard that I was basically done towing there and contacted me and said, hey, we'd sure love to have you tow it here at Crystal, and, whenever you'd like to. And so, I basically... It's a very, very different sort of system. The way that they do things there, they have a very set way of especially like ground ops and things like that, which I think it doesn't quite adhere to the soaring manual, but it still is yielded basically zero incidents on the ground because it is unequivocal the way that they do this. I feel very safe flying there. The aircraft are well maintained. They have a top-notch fleet of gliders, ASK-21s. So, that students get to fly something that is actually fairly high performance. It is indicative of the kind of gliders they would fly once they got away from training. They are very, very hands-on in terms of every single individual who comes there that wants to learn to fly. They get to know them and they tailor the learning experience for them. Julie is especially there if there are young, female students and whatnot. She's there to give them personal sort of encouragement and whatnot, because she actually did learn to fly as a result of going out there. She learned to fly gliders and got her private license in gliders. So at any rate, it's a marvelous place. They always are looking for people to come out and tow and fly rides and teach. And as I say, many times you're doing it for the benefit of others who could not possibly afford it or could not possibly dream of doing something so amazing as to fly in an aircraft at all. It's a unique experience, and I'm really happy to be there.
In your bio, you shared a great quote with us that you say encapsulates your philosophy and best practices in soaring and in aviation in general. Let me just read it here real quick. Flying is inherently risky, but with adequate training and maintenance, the risk becomes acceptable. Let's segue now into a safety segment, and we're going to divide it up maybe into a few specific sub-questions. You've obviously been on both ends of the tow rope for many years now in the tow plane. What are a couple of events or near events that maybe pop into mind over the years? What did or maybe almost happened, and what did you or the glider pilot behind you take away from all of that?
Well, first, I'd like to mention where that quote came from. That particular quote came from Tony Levere, who was the Lockheed test pilot who first flew the U-2 spy plane and the P-38 Lightning, and lived to a ripe old age and actually didn't die in the cockpit. And so that's one of the reasons why I particularly like his that quote, because
Yeah.
someone who had the cred. As far as on the both ends of the tow rope, yeah, for as far as towing is concerned, there is something that I learned early on. I remember the first day I flew, I heard a guy basically saying it, and if you really get in trouble, you give him a rope. And that just sounded like, it's almost like, oh, you're going to hang him, or, what does that really mean? And what it is.
Yeah.
So giving him the rope basically is pulling the tow release and releasing the rope from your end.
Yeah.
If they get in trouble. And it is that is the one thing about soaring. Soaring is a fundamentally a very safe kind of flying. The speeds are fairly low. The aircraft are extremely well built and can withstand G loads that general aviation aircraft, can only do about half what a glider can do. And so generally, when there's, if there is a problem and you have an incident in the glider, generally the crew will walk away. And so that's a really good thing. But there is a critical portion of the flight, which is the beginning of the flight, just a few feet off the ground, when both aircraft basically are they've got no place to go except straight ahead.
Yeah.
And that's where both pilots, the pilot of the glider and the pilot of the tow plane, are relying on each other's abilities to safely climb away to a more safe altitude. In my case, I have given a couple of people the rope. In the one case, it was a guy who truly was just out of sorts. He just had no business being there. I think this was actually back at Cray. It was a club guy, and I think he hadn't flown in a few years and had forgotten all the hand signals and pretty much everything else. And we were at about 600 feet up, and he was in a 232, which that is a very, very large training glider. It weighs probably almost as much as the Pawnee does. And so when people move that thing around behind you, you really feel it. And he wound up, I was at about 600 feet above the ground, and suddenly my tail swung around, and I thought, oh, he's trying to steer me. And so I basically let him steer me in the direction that he wanted to go. And then a moment later, I was looking down at the ground. The nose of the airplane, he'd actually pulled so hard that he pulled my tail up, and I was at about a 45-degree angle to the ground, looking basically at it. There was about 1 second, and I gave him the rope, because it was like there was no way that I could recover from that. If I would have tried to pull back on the stick and try to level out, I probably would have snap rolled the airplane and spun it in, and that would have been it for me.
Yeah.
So instead, I gave him the rope, and we both survived. He wound up paying for the tow rope. But that was where basically the guy lost control. He had no business doing that. And I read on the riot act when I got on the ground. Another time was with a guy who had an experimental glider that he built in the 50s, and he brought it back out to fly it. It looked like a pterodactyl, and it had an extremely high tow speed and whatnot. And so this poor guy was trying to fly this thing, and he would lose control on the ground while we were just starting to roll, because he had no aileron control at all. And I gave him the rope 2 times, basically just one after another. And I'll never forget it, because we went ahead and we rolled everything down, because there was a slight wind blowing the other direction. So everybody all traipsed over to the other end of the airport and got set up. And I remember looking down on my lap, thinking to myself, I may die. If this gets out of hand, I may die. Do I really want to do this? And something in me said, yeah, what the heck?
No.
And so we took off, and we're running along, and sure enough, he got off the ground, and it's like, okay, great. And I saw him he was going, we have mirrors on the tow plane so we can see what's going on behind us. And so I'm watching him. And basically, when the guy goes outside of your field of view in the mirrors, it's like, okay, this is it. We're done. I'm going to go ahead and give him the rope. But I saw him starting to gain control of it. And I thought, okay, I think he's going to make it. And then suddenly I got jerked into my straps, just this like, oh my gosh, I'm still on the ground at this point, and he's flying. And then bang, I got slammed in the back. My head slammed, I got slammed back into the back of the seat. My head snapped back, and all of a sudden I'm flying.
Oh my.
And I have no idea what just happened. And as it turned out, he had a malfunction in the wingtip. And it basically, he was about 15 feet over the ground, and the tip hit the ground, and he was going sideways. And the tow rope broke, and that's what
Oh my
so it was like,
goodness.
that's it. So I changed the name from pterodactyl to terrorodactyl at that point.
Oh man.
But
Oh my goodness.
so that was, but the bottom line though is basically, there is a time where altruism just does not work. And that is the time when you are both at such a low altitude. It's every man for himself. It's basically, he's going to kill me. I'm going to let him go.
Yeah.
Or I just lost the engine. I got to save myself. And, the tow plane's going to have to, or the glider's going to have to do whatever he wants.
Yeah.
So those are the kinds of things that do have to happen. And so consequently, what's interesting is my biennials. I do them partially with Chris, who's been around a while, and he will hit me with these particular scenarios and say, what would you do? And it's like, oh, shoot, I didn't think of that one. And so, all of them are very, very good because you keep those in mind, and you're constantly thinking about what you'll do if something happens. It's you can't be relaxed. You never can relax.
That's for sure. Just Soaring, the makers of the Glider Sim Pro Sailplane Simulator Cockpit, would like to congratulate German pilot Ben Fest for his recent victory in the first ever FAI-sanctioned aviation esports event in history, the Sailplane World Grand Prix, which Ben won after several days of exciting competition against some of the top Condor soaring pilots from around the world. If you are looking for a best-in-class dedicated sailplane simulator cockpit for Condor or Microsoft Flight Sim, look no further than the Just Soaring Glider Sim Pro. Check them out at justsoaring.com or at just.soaring on Instagram. Now, flipping the last question around, with you in the glider and someone else flying the tow, maybe share with listeners a tow or two that sticks with you for whatever reason, good or bad, or otherwise.
Well, yeah, there's actually two at opposite ends of the spectrum. There was one in which we were taking off. I was actually doing a biennial. I was sitting in the rear seat. I always do my flight reviews from the rear seat of the glider because that's where I'm the only place I'm ever going to fly two-place glider because I always fly my passengers in the front seat. We were about 300 feet above the ground, and for whatever reason, this tow pilot decides to make a hard bank right turn and just go streaking on downwind and basically went swing. Yeah, and so I'm zinging along in this ASK-21, and I could not keep behind him, and the rope broke. Boom, just like that. And it's like, and I'm with the instructor, and I said, I made the comment, I'm a little bit high for a 180. And he says, yeah, I think you can go ahead and you got the energy. Go ahead and just do a complete pattern. And so I went actually made an abbreviated downwind and landed.
Oh, wow.
No issue there, but I was just kind of flabbergasted that this guy would do that. I don't know what he was thinking. Maybe he thought we'd done a rope break and he just wanted to get back in. I'm not really sure. By the same token, it was actually this season, and I was at Mountain Valley, and I was towing behind a guy named Bill Lanningham up at Mountain Valley. And it was zen-like from the moment we started rolling to the moment I released. It was just like, it was so calm and so peaceful. And he turned and I turned. I felt like we were one. It was just the most amazing feeling. Like I'd never felt anything like that before during the entire tow. And then I released and I called down and said, tow 2, thanks for the great tow. But I meant to go and see Bill afterwards and say, I don't know what you did, but man, that was a lot of fun. So it just depends, it's just, it's conditions. It's your particular abilities at that time. It's the condition of the tow plane. It's the attitude of the tow pilot, any number of things. And all of those basically can combine to make a very different experience from flight to flight.
Now, given you have a lot of experience mountain flying, and given we have many listeners from parts of the country or the world that don't fly in rough mountain terrain that often, can you please spend a few minutes and maybe some detail talking about safety considerations flying in the mountains, and what are some common mistakes that have wrecked gliders or taken lives over the years, and what we as glider pilots should always keep in mind while we are mountain soaring?
Well, the main thing for me, the very, very first thing is keep your speed up. I find myself talking to myself out loud, speed, speed, speed. particularly when I'm in a really tight situation and it's, and I'm close in and I'm not really, I'm not in much lift or whatever and whatnot. The key thing is don't ever pull that stick back and slow things down. You've got to keep the speed up because especially in mountain conditions, when you're very close to the terrain, the relative airspeed of, the airspeed of your glider, the relative wind can change very dramatically. Can go plus or minus 20 knots. And so you need to have enough maneuverability. You need to stay above stall. You need to be able to have the maneuverability necessary to do whatever you have to get out of a bad situation. So that's the first thing. The next thing is always leave yourself an out. In my case, for instance, the kind of soaring that I do, and I think the Sierras and the Inyo Mountains and the White Mountains basically afford this, is the mountains are so tall and so high, and they slope away so quickly, that the slopes are very, very steep. What it means is you can have one wingtip that's 100 feet away from the grass, and you're counting the grass blades to your right, and your left wingtip is 8,000 feet above the ground. So, the idea though is that, if you get in trouble, you can always just turn out away from it and just get away. And if you're really rattled, just go land. That's the main thing. The other thing, of course, is always keep in mind where the wind is blowing, where it's blowing out of. Yeah. Keep in mind where you are, where the rocks are, or the slopes or what have you, where they are relative to the wind and where you are relative to them. Clearly, of course, you don't want to be on the downwind side. If you get over a ridge, for instance, and you want to make sure and stay upwind of the top of the ridge. If you're that high up, I've come into mountains where I'm way down. I'm maybe a half high. I mean, I'm just a couple thousand feet above the desert floor, and the mountain is stretching 10,000 feet above me. And you basically start there, and that's an interesting thing. I'll never forget the first time it happened, and it always goes this way too. Is that you get in this one spot where you get this nice little piece of lift, and you're starting to turn, and you're getting a little higher, and things are looking really good. And the thing you want to do is just kind of stay in that nice little thermal over there. When you realize what you have to do is start going farther up slope. And it seems scary because, oh my God, I've got to get closer to the ground again. And is there going to be any lift there and whatnot? But you've got to do it if you intend to climb and get to the top of the ridge. And so you move a little bit closer to a little bit farther up the ridge, and you start working down. Oh my gosh, there's another thermal. Okay. And you keep on going and going, and you gradually work your way up. And you look back and say, my gosh, I was way down there before. And suddenly there you are getting pretty close to the top of the ridge. But as I say, the main thing is you have to visualize where the wind's coming from and the shape of the mountains, the shape of the slopes, where you are, to determine if this is really going to be safe for you to try to fly. And of course, you also want to maintain enough of a distance, especially if the winds are high. You want to make sure that you maintain enough of a distance away from the ridge that the wind doesn't perhaps blow you dangerously close to it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
One of the very first times I was flying, I was at what we called a safari out of Bishop, California, and we were flying in the Inyo Mountains, or flying up to them. And we got word that a guy had killed himself over the switchbacks in the Sierras. It was a guy in an ASW-20, and he got slow and spun it in. And, that's what will happen if you do not pay attention to that. If you don't keep your speed up, I mean, as you can kind of see where I'm going with all this, is that there's a lot of multitasking going on. There's a lot of things you have to keep account of while you're flying in there. You can't let go of any one thing. You can't fixate on something. You have to be continually aware of things. You may want to be in this one little spot, but realize, you know what, if I try that, I may get slammed into the hillside, and I'm just not going to do it. And there's other areas where, as you say, as I said, the ground looks so scary, but well, there's lift there, so go, sort of thing, and just keep on climbing up. The end result is, of course, when you do get up to the top, I got the dog here. He just went for a walk. I should go.
No,
hold on a second. There we go.
Gotta love the pets. They always want to know what's going on.
Oh, absolutely. He's no exception. But the one thing that does happen, though, the payoff is when you do make it to the top, and you're able to get, like, the White Mountains, for instance, are just such an amazing. It's a mountain range that goes about 60 miles. You get to the top of that, and you can get up to 17,000 feet and go screaming along at 100 knots plus, and just hopping from thermal to thermal. it's so busy and so fast there that they actually have a different frequency for air to air just in that one area.
Oh, wow.
Because people are coming and going at such rapid rates from either from the north at Minden or for the south, we're in my neck of the woods. But that's what the payoff is when you get up there. The view is just spectacular, hundreds of miles in all directions. And of course, we're always on oxygen as well.
Mm.
So that's the thing I think about sometimes, the folks in the East, flying the Appalachians and those kinds of places. And they have a very different kind of soaring there. People in Florida, things like that. In the East Coast it's very different. It tends to be a little bit, probably the conditions aren't as strong, and your altitudes generally don't get that high. Whereas in the Sierras, it is a dynamic, fast, bonsai world out there. I mean, you're on oxygen and you're flying at 90, 100 knots between thermals, and then zinging along in these 10 knot thermals up to altitude, and getting, dangerously close to the clouds. We have something called cloud suck, where you basically get so close that you actually get sucked into the clouds, and you have to be careful with that as well. Just the dynamics of flying in the Sierras is very, very different. It's just an e-ticket ride the whole time when it's really right.
Absolutely. I'm used to flying here in the East and Appalachians, and I did go out there to Crystal and fly for a little bit, and yeah, wow, it was night and day.
It really is, yeah.
Yeah. Wrapping up the safety segment, and just in general, is there anything else that you want to toss out there? Stuff that you think just goes under the radar, or maybe it's too often happening or almost happening to pilots that you are around?
One thing that I really don't care for is to see that there are quite a few pilots and student pilots that really don't pay attention to spot landings. A glider is a glider, and you get one shot at landing. And sometimes that shot is not in an airfield. Sometimes it's in a pasture, or maybe a very small lake bed, or even a roadside. There's any number of things. And I've watched people fly halfway down the runway before they touch down, and knowing that, if that happened in real life, that could be really, really bad.
Yeah.
And so if there's one thing I'd like to stress to people, and this is not just students, but everyone alike, is pick your spot on the ground. I mean, every landing should be an event. Every landing should be a learning event for you to, see how well you can do to land as close as you possibly can to where you want to land, and to do so steeply. For instance, every flight I do is generally, all my approaches, and especially in the Pawnee, they're very high descent rates. But in my sailplane, I don't like to come in flat. I don't want to rely on the glide ratio of the glider to save me. I want to come in with lots of dive brakes, at least half to a third the whole way down. And with my flap settings on my glider, the nose is actually looking down quite a bit. The idea then is to be able to come over an obstacle behind you and land, get on the ground safely. And so that's one thing I think people should be really thinking about, is that every landing they should be trying to hit the numbers, or pretty darn close to them, and see how short you can make it. I think that would be extremely good for glider pilots, and really power pilots too. The one problem I see with power planes a lot of times is people just dragging it in. They're way, way out there, and they've got all this power, and you can see, the glide slope is basically just almost flat. So they don't even know where they're going to land, because the relative angle of the runway is such that it's hard to judge where they really will land. And so I'll never forget one time I was with my stepmother, who owned a Grumman Tiger. I was flying that airplane. She wanted to kind of give me a little checkout before I flew her airplane around for a bit. I turned base and was way high. And I remember she looked at me and went, "Jesus, Tom." And I said, "Ellie, it's going to be okay. I'm going to probably have to add power." And, so it was basically, I like to come in real steep, full flaps, full boards, everything, or not full boards. You definitely don't want to come in full boards on a glider. You want to definitely have something left over. But the idea is to come in as steep as you can and put it down, where you want to. That's basically that.
Yeah, good advice. So if you had to pick a flight, just one flight in a glider that for whatever reason will stand the test of time and is a flight you probably never forget, can you tell us about that day and what made it memorable?
Well, I think probably the most memorable flight so far is the last one, which was the Dust Devil Dash I mentioned before. Getting to that point where I really was, I just did not know where I was going to land. I wasn't sure I was going to make it. And the one thing that came to mind, because of course, I did a heck of a postmortem off of it, saying, why the heck did you get yourself in that position? And what on earth, drove you to do what you did? And the one thing that came to mind was simply, in anything in which risk is involved, is just don't panic. Stay the course. If you decide to make a particular decision and this is the one that's going to save you, then just don't panic. Stay on it and work it. Don't suddenly, bail and do something stupid. There was actually another time also. I mean, the times that come to mind are times where, it was just plain scary. And there was another time, and it was with Rob Morgan, actually. And the two of us had decided to go skittering off to the north from Mountain Valley. It looked like there was some cumulus of what are called the Paiutes. They were probably about 25 miles away, and we decided to go for it. And the conditions weren't that great, and it was dead flat. And I'm just flying and flying and flying. And we finally get to this one ridge, and the cues are just beyond it. And I'm low. And I turn at that ridge, hoping that there's a little bit of lift or whatever. And I realize I am really, really hosed. There's nothing but a gigantic valley of nothing but rocks and trees and rivers and things like that. And it's like, I have no place to land. If I land here, I will not get my glider back and I may not survive it. And I realized, what have I done? And Rob was a little bit higher than me. And he just went diving off into this, above this canyon that I could barely see. And I said, well, dang it, that's what I'm going to do. So he was high enough that he found a thermal on the left side of this canyon and was able to work his way out. I was in the middle of the canyon. I was actually below. I was down deep in the canyon in a glider, following it down. And I couldn't see the end of the canyon. It actually turned to the right a little bit. And I was basically thinking, okay, if this doesn't go where I think it is, I'm hoping it's going to Lake Isabella. I'm going to pancake it into the riverbed. There was no place for me to go. And sure enough, I made the slight turn. There it is. There was Lake Isabella, and there's actually an airport called Kernville on the east shore of it that I pretty much think I had made. But I also saw a little cue popping up from a little knob a bit below me, and I started working that and worked my way out of it. But I'll never forget watching my legs wiggle back and forth on the rudder pedals, because I was just, I had no business being there. But once again, it was don't panic. Just, stay the course, do what you got to do, commit to what you're going to be doing. Solve the problem when it gets there. Don't make a problem. Just solve the ones that you encounter. Well, there is one more I just got to say. This one was just so amazing. It was when I got into a Dust Devil. It was about the only lift that I was in. I was in my pick, and I'm hauling away on this thing. And this thing is almost flipping me upside down. I was low, and it was super turbulent. And all of a sudden, I was engulfed by flocks of birds. It was the most amazing thing. There were eagles, there were seagulls, there were crows, and they're all basically flying around on this thing. And I could tell they were fighting for control just like I was. And no one cared who there was. I mean, bird of prey was flying next to his next meal, but they weren't paying attention to any other reason because they were all on this massive gaggle of stuff. And I realized just for a moment, I felt like I was one of them. I felt like I was a flying animal. And all we flying animals were just fighting for our lives in this big Dust Devil. And then as soon as that happened, they were all gone. All the birds were gone in different directions. And there I was, still flying in the Dust Devil. But that's one that I will always carry with me, was to be amidst all of these birds. They didn't care that I was there with them. They were just too busy flying.
Yeah.
So anyway, that pretty much takes care of that, I think.
In your estimation and consideration, the people you've flown with or known over the years, did you ever know any glider pilots without any powered flying experience at all that were just phenomenal glider pilots? And do you think that in general, folks with some powered flying learn quicker over time, will be better glider pilots, all things equal?
There actually is a glider pilot that was truly amazing. I haven't seen much of him lately. His name is Dale Masters. He was flying at Crystal and retired recently. He had an amazing ability to demonstrate energy management, and which is really key in soaring, especially cross-country soaring. And the one that really came to mind was something he did with me. It was actually when I was first checking out to fly at Crystal. And we were in an ASK 21. We'd gone back behind what was called the second ridge. We'd gotten off tow. I was still trying to figure out the glider, and he was telling me to do something or other, and I wasn't paying too much attention, and I let us get on the downwind side of the second ridge. This is pretty scary stuff, and I'm looking at thinking, oh man, we're going to have to basically fly down behind the ridge, and hopefully we can make it to a field before we get to Crystal, because I didn't think we were going to make it home. And he said, I've got it, belt up. And I tied up the seat belts, and he proceeded to dive straight at the mountainside at about a 45-degree angle, and then zoomed up and pulled about 4 Gs going straight up, pushed over the top, dirt's flying all over the place, zoomed back down again and did the same thing very close to the ridge. And we actually got higher and higher, and he got us above the ridge on the backside. I've never seen anything like that before.
Wow.
And I was just glad as heck to be clear of it. And we made it back home, no problem. And he asked me a question after the flight was over. And he asked me, were you scared? And I said, I was flying with Dale Masters. I knew that he was going to save himself and save me too. So that's really a key thing there is, as I say, energy management is everything. And Dale was the absolute guru of it.
Nice. Yeah, Dale's awesome. I actually got to fly with him when I was out there. Aerox, the #1 in portable and engineered aviation oxygen systems, your source for FAA-approved oxygen mask and portable oxygen systems, and now introducing the Aerox Pro 2 Plus Flight Bag portable oxygen system. Small, lightweight, and simple to use, the Pro 2 Plus is perfect for the occasional user who wants the flexibility to access higher altitudes without worry about flying impaired. Now available at Aerox distributors and at Aerox.com. So remember, our friends at Aerox, engineered for aviators. So Tom, before we get into the lightning round, we usually like to give guests a chance to give a shout out to the people that one way or another positively impacted their soaring lives: instructors, airport operators, glider buddies, family. So here's your shot.
People that have had an influence on me. There are some people out there who are long past, and I guess that's the problem, is that so many people that I know that had such an influence on my life were years and years ago when I was first starting. I started flying almost 50 years ago. And so I have known pilots who had shot down Germans in the war. I've known Germans who have shot down Americans. John Cray, of course, was an amazing guy. He was one of the greatest generation. He flew transports between South America and Africa during World War II. Vern Hutchison was an amazing glider pilot who taught me a lot about energy management, about what you could do. And he had been in a submarine stuck in Tokyo Harbor in World War II. My first instructor had 30,000 hours in transports, things like that. It's just one guy that was kind of interesting was, I don't know if you're familiar with Pancho Barnes, who was part of the Right Stuff. She had that bar out there in the desert that Chuck Yeager used to go to. Well, her son was my check ride pilot. He was the one who gave me my private check ride. And he was a son of a gun. Not a very nice guy at all, but boy, could he fly. Even though he'd had polio, he was still an extremely good pilot. I've known a lot of guys that basically, tangentially, just because of knowing my dad, that were just fantastic people to learn from and to gain experiences from, and just to watch them go. And so I've been exposed to excellence all my life in flying, and I would hope that maybe a little bit has rubbed off.
Wow, that's awesome. So we come to our lightning round, which is a fun little segment. Not sure if you've heard about it. We asked you some questions. You can answer the question, or you can say pass and move on to the next one.
So I take it the answers are going to be as lightning as the questions?
Yeah, usually, but sometimes we've gotten some interesting stories off this lightning round. So yeah, we try to keep it quick, but,
okay, great.
But feel free to expand a little bit if you need to. So you were at an equidistance point between Crystal and Tehachapi, and the weather forecast looks about the same. So your glider is in a trailer behind your truck. Do you A, flip a coin, B, go to Tehachapi, or C, go to Crystal?
Tehachapi, even though Crystal is free.
Do you ever wish that Tehachapi and Crystal weren't on the same 123 radio frequency?
Occasionally, yes. As a tow pilot at Crystal, I've had Tehachapi calling and doing all kinds of stuff while I was trying to call back into the office and whatnot. So, but on the other hand, I've been at Tehachapi when I've heard Crystal, and I've chatted with the office every now and then to say, "Hey, Zulu Niners here."
Nice. Have you ever flown a glider outside the U.S.? And if not, and budget no consideration, where would you want to go?
I actually did. I flew a Blahnik L-13 in Slovakia.
Nice.
I'd heard about this guy Timo in a place called the Fatras. It was actually a mountain range in Slovakia. I was there with my son at a model airplane contest, a junior free fly model airplane contest in Luceniec, and I drove 2.5 hours to the Fatras, and I had Timo take me up in a L-13 behind this. The tow rope was about 60 feet long behind this. I don't know what kind of airplane it was, but man, that was a wild ride just getting up to altitude.
Oh man, that's a short rope.
Yes, it was.
If you could fly a glider at only one bank angle other than level, what would it be?
One bank angle other than level, probably about 40 degrees.
Okay, yeah.
40 degrees means you're in the thermal tight. So,
there you go. What's your favorite type of lift, all things equal, thermal, wave, ridge, or convergence?
I think I like ridge the best. Wave, I don't really care for wave because I just don't like what there's a number of risks that you take there and that I'm just not interested in. But ridge is just plain fun. Getting close in and polishing the rocks of the wingtip. I love doing that.
What was the worst place you've landed out in, and why did it suck?
I've actually never landed out anywhere except a runway, but the suckiest runway was Cray.
Oh, okay. So 3 gliders are in a thermal, and it's like the only thermal in the area with limited other options. All 3 guys are doing left turns. Along comes a 4th guy, and only a few hundred feet below the others. He enters the thermal in a right turn and announces his call sign and altitude for the other 3 guys above him as a courtesy. What do? Be polite and say nothing and keep your eyes peeled? Bark at him on the radio to rejoin in a left bank together with the other guys? Or just move along and go try to find something else?
I would definitely bark at him, or at least ask him kindly, hey, you know what? You got to turn the other direction for all our safety.
Right. If you had to pick one thing for lower hour glider pilots trying to learn how to thermal more efficiently and effectively, what would be your advice to them?
Get used to flying as slow as you possibly can, and don't be afraid of spinning out of it.
Oh, nice. Money no object, and you could only spend it on a glider. What dream glider would you buy, and what do you like about it?
Oh, boy. ASG 29. And just because it is a very fast glider, it's also... you can change wingtips on it. You can make it a 15-meter or an 18-meter ship. That one has become the object of my lust.
If you could only fly one type of powered aircraft for the rest of your days, because God ordered it that way, what type would it be and why?
I would fly an F1, Harmon F1. It's basically a modification of a Harmon rocket. It's a 2-seat aircraft. It looks like an extra. It looks like a purpose-built aerobatic airplane, but it's super high power. My father, he used to fly a Bearcat, flew in one of those, and he played a game that he only had done in the Bearcat called Hello, Mr. Cloud, where he basically saw a cloud, aimed the airplane at it, and punched it. That is the one airplane that would keep my interest the rest of my life.
Wow. Now, you're on a podcast here, and lots of people are listening, so here's an easy one. What's the most annoying thing CFIs do when you're towing?
The most annoying thing CFIs do when I'm towing?
Yeah.
Whoa. Probably trying to steer me without telling me. I don't mind boxing wakes. They can do that all day long. But yeah, it's basically steering, and because I'm not sure what they really want.
Okay, same question, but for students.
Oh, what's the most annoying thing with students? Oh, my goodness. Hey, listen, there are some students who they gain a rep. It's like, oh, no, it's so-and-so, man. Beware. They're just so completely out of control. It's like you can't believe that they just don't get it.
Yeah.
And, they're all over the map. You wonder how it is that they could make a glider do something like that on a tow rope. So that's the annoying thing is you just hope that they are going to be okay.
Okay, Tom, have you ever had to bail out of an aircraft?
I never have.
And speaking of bailing out, if you had the choice of bailing out or landing in a lake, which would it be?
I'd rather land on a lake. At least I've got control all the way down to the surface. In a parachute, there's just a lot of risk items that come into play, like will it open, and all that kind of stuff, and where will I land? Oh, I'd land on a lake.
Now, we didn't ask Howie this on the last episode, but this one is a favorite because of the variety of answers that we've actually gotten. So here goes. You have a gently sloping uphill field you can land out in, but your flight computer is showing a brisk 20-knot tailwind. And the only other field that looks viable as your land out becomes imminent, while that field is sloping about the same gradient, but downhill, but has a 20-knot headwind. Which one do you pick and why?
I would pick whatever field I would pick with a headwind, because I have control of the aircraft, whatever speed it might be, but it just means that my ground speed touching down will be that much slower. The difference between a 20-knot tailwind and a 20-knot headwind means 40 knots difference in ground speed when you touch down. That's a lot of energy to try to peel off. So I'd always land into the wind no matter what.
Good advice for sure. Tom, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a blast chatting with you and hearing your story. You've had some amazing adventures.
Well, thank you so much. I'm just honored to be invited, and this has been a really, really great time talking with you, Chuck.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it. Thank you. And I know the listeners have enjoyed it too. Well, we'll probably touch back with you. We often do. Check in with our guests and see what they've been up to. And take care, and we'll chat with you soon.
Well, thank you very much, and thermals to you, Chuck.
Happy soaring. Wow, what an exciting interview. Thanks again, Tom. Looking ahead at our next episode, we will be back with a new guest pilot as well as some new soaring segments for you next time on 106. We will have a new listener logbook as well as a new segment from Sergio, the soaring master, to be back to chat with us. And don't forget to drop your story on our website at soaringthesky.com. It is super easy. I don't know how it can be any easier. Just click on the Contact Us, then hit the blue and white microphone icon that says Share Your Story. I know a lot of you have had some great flights and are holding out on us. Don't be shy. You can even remain anonymous if you like. So until next time, stay healthy, stay safe, and happy soaring.
If you would like to say hi and let us know where you are enjoying the podcast, we would love to hear from you. If you are a glider pilot and want to share your aviation journey, contact us at chuck@soaringthesky.com or send us a message on our website at soaringthesky.com and Chuck will get in touch with you. We hope you join us next time for another soaring adventure here on Soaring the Sky, a Glider Pilots podcast. Soaring the Sky is written and produced by Chuck Fulton, co-producer Mitch Thompson. Original music for the podcast was written and produced by Kim Spangler. Graphic design for the podcast was created by Zachary Fulton. Voiceover work was done by Michelle Perez.